All right. Well, why don't we get started? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be an exciting and informative webinar. My name is Craig Savitsky, and I am the Director of Content here at Leopard Solutions. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our distinguished panel. But first, a little bit about the subject that they'll be covering. The title of today's webinar is Beyond Tradition, Gen Z's Approach to Big Law. They have been called everything from Zoomers to iGeneration to Homelanders, and their unique perspective has often confounded senior management. Earlier this year, Leopard Solutions and Major Lindsey Africa collaborated on a first-time survey of junior associates whose JD years aligned with those of the Gen Z cohort demographic. Judging by the over 500 responses received, many were eager to share their stories about their transition from law school to law firm. So without further ado, our panelists. We have Laura Leopard, CEO and founder of Leopard Solutions, Nathan Peart, Managing Director and Practice Lead, Major Lindsey Africa, and Jackie Bokser LeFebrve, Managing Director, Major Lindsey Africa. I will be dropping their LinkedIn bios in the Q&A. If you have any questions throughout the conversation, feel free to place them in the Q&A and we will try and get to them as time allows. Now, I know we have a lot of data to delve into, so Laura, would you like to kick things off?
Sure. Thank you, Craig. And thank you for stepping in for Phil today. So I appreciate that. All right, I'm just gonna start my little slideshow here, and we'll start taking a look at some of the survey results and some of the data. So thanks everybody for joining us. You know, we recently presented our findings at the NALP conference in Boston, and we are very pleased to share those results with you today. We're also going to be making the recording available to you, and there will be a white paper that's going to be available shortly thereafter. So lots of information coming your way. So I really I didn't know of some of the terms that Craig just said, like homelanders and stuff like that. But we do know that every generation has their own traits and their own trials, and this generation is no exception. The Gen Z generation tends to be rather pessimistic. They have feelings of climate anxiety, and they have strong opinions on diversity, sustainability, and authority. And they are very vocal in their belief that companies have a responsibility to address environmental and social issues. Jackie, do you want to tell us a little bit more about Gen Z from your perspective?
I'd love to, Laura. Thank you. So Gen Z lawyers, they're defined as people born between 1997 and 2012. They're about 24% of the US population and about 36% of the US workforce. And they are the most diverse generation to date. So this generation of lawyers, they're now practicing as lawyers for the first time as the class of 2021, 2022, and 2023. And those are the individuals that we surveyed. So we want to keep in mind just a couple of things about this generation. They've been shaped by certain historical realities. They experienced the Great Recession and the slow recovery that followed. They watched their parents lose jobs and their older siblings move back home. They witnessed a growing wealth gap between income groups and experienced rising expenses for necessities like housing and transportation, food and healthcare, as well as a dramatic rise in higher education tuition and student debt. This is a very indebted generation. And finally, COVID-19 shaped this generation as it shaped many of us.
So the Gen Zers who answered our survey, were in the USA, and most were in litigation in their legal life, followed by financial services and M&A. 42% had been at their firm for less than a year, 21% 1 year, 21% 2 years. 56 of the respondents were female. 55% were white, 9% African American, 11% Asian, 8% Hispanic, and 4% Middle Eastern North African. And 92% of the respondents work for an AmLaw top 200 firm. So we asked them, has your experience working at your current firm matched the expectations you had in law school? And 69% said yes. But when we split by gender, we saw that 64% of women said yes, but 76% of men had said yes. Most chose their firms because of the culture they perceived the firm had. You know, a firm reputation and compensation also played a big role. A resounding 79% were satisfied with the work they had been assigned. Nathan?
Thanks, Laura. So this isn't just about job dissatisfaction. We can see from the data that work assignments have been positively rated. And I think the issue really lies in the gap between expectations during the law school hiring process and how firms sell their culture, their reputation, and compensation, and the reality of the working world. It reflects Gen Z's broader perception that working life has been somewhat oversold by previous generations, and there's an indifference by them to the status quo. I think it's crucial to recognize this isn't just about a generation struggling to adjust to the realities of the working world either. It does raise questions about why certain systematic issues persist in the industry and how they shape Gen Z's attitudes towards work and the wider world. I think we need to think about the long term here and how our approaches must evolve if we really want to engage Gen Z effectively and if we're really truly going to shape organizational change.
When asked if they would make the same choice again, meaning choosing the law firm that they chose, again, a large percentage said yes. For those who said no, culture was the word most often used, right? Now, we also heard just a minute ago that culture was like the big reason why they chose the law firm that they chose. So for the ones that answered this way, it was all about the culture. Culture had changed. The culture was negative. The firm had changed. They also said their practice was not what they expected. And they also may have underestimated how demanding the work would be. We asked, do you feel your legal education prepared you well for your role at your current firm? 55% said yes. Most of the answers dealt with the reality that only litigation is touched on in law schools. Transactional work, a large share of law firm life, is not taught, nor is IP and other practices. They were not taught the practical side, they said, and they now find the work to be very vocational. Practical skills was really at the top of the list in varying forms. 45% is a pretty high percentage of those who felt they were not prepared by their school for the job that they were going to take. Jackie?
Thanks. So I don't think it's surprising that 45% of Gen Z feel that their legal education hasn't really prepared them well for their roles in a law firm. I think some of this impact is related to the changes that we witnessed during the pandemic and related to the remote learning that this generation experienced. But some of Gen Z's gripes with legal education training is really more related to practical skill development, like Laura mentioned, and how their academic training translates to their professional lives. Many associates that we speak to, they share that their first time coming into contact with a transactional document is in a law firm setting, not during law school training. And this creates a pretty significant knowledge gap for them. And also it applies a lot of pressure to them to get up to speed really quickly. We hear from them often that they see a lot of value in clinics, in pro bono opportunities, as well as drafting-oriented coursework. And they want opportunities that allow them to practice specific skills that they're expected to have once they join a law firm from day one. So where do we go from here? I think this feedback from Gen Z students should encourage a dialogue within the law school setting around how to offer this coursework, as well as the clinics and the practice-specific training opportunities to help develop these practical skills. I would encourage more of a specific focus on transaction-oriented skill development. And also, Gen Z lawyers, they want more support in building skills that are going to allow them to succeed within a law firm setting that's not necessarily related to the practice of law, but more training related to how to navigate a law firm and its culture, how to utilize the unique technology that they're going to have to use from day one, also how to interact with clients and engage in networking.
Sure. We even heard a comment about how they would really like an instructional on how to navigate law firm politics. So there's a lot they go in not knowing. So when we asked if you could change legal education with just a wave of your hand, how would you better prepare law students for their future careers? And boy, they told us they really craved more practical courses, more focus on the needed practical skills that would help them in their work, even just learning Excel or the Adobe suite. They also suggested a practical but radically different system that would give them an internship in a law firm where they could really see the practical side of the job and they could learn from practicing attorneys. When asked about their ultimate career goal, 36% said their goal was to make partner at a law firm. 24% planned to transition into in-house, and 9% said they would leave legal practice. So we looked at these same comments through the gender lens, and we saw that there was a big divide on some of these. Just 30% of women said their goal was to make partner, compared to 55% of men. Women also said they would go in-house, 37%, to men at just 15%. Women were also more interested in working in government and in nonprofit more than men. But men said that they would leave the legal profession altogether at twice the rate that women did. Nathan?
Thanks, Laura. So I have three key takeaways from all of this that I was thinking about. I think there's a critical need to address work-life balance and create more appealing long-term career paths, particularly in the law firm environment, if you want to retain talent, especially as some Gen Z lawyers still prioritize making partner, but they reject the traditional ways of working. We're starting to see a lot of that pandemic flexibility being reversed, and I think this can be a great solution for training and mentorship, but it also doesn't provide a long-term solution to how this generation wants to work. I think secondly, the strong interest in roles like in-house, government, or nonprofit really reflects the desire for this generation for having careers that are offering work-life balance or perceived to, and opportunities for meaningful work. It's a very altruistic generation, and it's a great learning opportunity for law firms to think about them in this context. And finally, the fact that a percentage of respondents are considering leaving law altogether, even after such a short time, which we hear anecdotally, it really does suggest that there's a shift and the industry needs to think about ways they can address career satisfaction.
When asked how long they plan to stay at their firm, 67% said 3+ years. But when we broke that up by gender, men plan to stay 3+ years, 17% more than women. More women selected 2 years more than men by about 12%. Jackie, do you have a comment?
I do. So there are certain preconceived notions about Gen Z and also millennials that they job hop frequently, that they're not loyal to their employers. But this data that Laura just shared with you, I think it paints a very different picture. 67% of Gen Z lawyers wanting to stay at their firm for 3+ years, I think is great. So the Gen Z lawyers who are likely to make lateral moves when they feel like their priorities are not being addressed out of their current platforms. So what this means is that Gen Z lawyers, they can be retained for longer periods of time, so long as their priorities are being heard and addressed. So given that Gen Z lawyers are interested in staying for longer periods of time, what I want us to think about is how do we encourage them to stay? So first, access to meaningful work. I would focus on access to meaningful work that really resonates with them. And this can come in the form of either pro bono work, where they can really cut their teeth, but more so from emphasizing a meritocracy environment. We want to assign work based on ability as opposed to just class year designation. And lastly, and most importantly, we want to incorporate Gen Z lawyers on matters holistically, on both their cases, their litigation cases, and their transactional matters, so that they can understand the entire matter and not feel like they're on a siloed portion of it. Second is training and mentorship. We want to create an environment that focuses on formal and informal training and real-time feedback that's meaningful to Gen Z. And we also want formal and informal mentorship, both at the associate and partner level, and encourage a culture of mentorship. And lastly, flexibility and work-life balance. Creating an environment that emphasizes work-life balance and boundaries is important. Allow the associates to build their hours, but provide them with opportunities to disconnect, especially while they're on vacation. And also allow for truly hybrid policies that allow associates to get their jobs done, but also while giving them the flexibility to be adults and structure their days in a way that's kind of convenient to them.
So we thought we would compare what they projected, how long they expected to stay, with some actual results. And our database shows that as of today, 72% of the entry-level hires with a JD year of 2021 have stayed at their firm, but many are still very junior at the firm. Remember, in the survey, most of the respondents had been there less than a year. So they still have plenty of time to leave before they hit that 3-year mark. But we have to remember, all of them weren't hired in 2021, right? They were hired in 2022, and some were even hired in 2023. So I think that success rate is a little inflated at this point. Jackie?
So, we know that this generation might want to stay at their firm for longer periods of time, but this data, it really needs to be viewed in the context of the economic conditions and the marketability of these class years. So we've seen very little demand for junior associates in these class years. 2021 associates are just starting to see traction in the market now. And 2022 and 2023 associates, they're still considered too junior for most of the lateral activity in the market. So for the 28% of 2021 associates who decided to leave and who went to another law firm or went to another M200 law firm, some of these associates were maybe motivated by traditional objectives like broadening or narrowing their practice or getting more client interaction. But whatever their motivation might have been, it really could have been related to just workflow contractions that were happening in 2023. Many junior associates that we spoke to were extremely slow. Some of them were put on performance plans, and many of them were affected by reductions in force. So these factors, I believe, impacted the movement of this class year. So I think that as these class years become true mid-levels and as workflow kind of returns to normal levels, we will be able to have a better picture of what the retention data is really going to look like for this generation.
So when we look at Gen Z exit data, we see that when they leave their firm, 22% return to a top 200 firm. They enter other law firms at about 20%, and I see 12% going into government. Now, when we compare their exits to all the exits in the top 200, we do see some differences. The largest is the entrance into government at 12% in Gen Z, because it's just 5% in the overall population. The entrance into law firms was actually down 2% for Gen Z than the entire group. So slightly different exit patterns. Now, when we look at a single class, we can see that not all were hired in the same year. And we see the retention number was better for those hired in 2021 with a JD of 2021. Retention slipped for those that were hired in 2022 by 13%. Now, we have asked have your career goals changed since you started at your current firm? And a large 64% said no. When split by gender, we see that more women than men have changed their goals since joining their firm. 41% of women said yes, while just 29% of men replied in the affirmative. When we asked why, they said they realized that making partner was not what they thought it was. They had no life, the partners that they saw at their firm, and their work-life balance was completely out of whack. Nathan, do you have a comment?
I do. Thanks, Laura. So we really dived into the qualitative responses here because they were really interesting. And I think there's a real trend of individuals either reconsidering the pursuit of partnership or adjusting expectations around it. The comments like things like life changes, so that's family moves or moving altogether, kids, could all be impactful here. And the idea of kind of the traditional climb the corporate ladder to the top is really being shaken up. I think the percentage of women reporting a change in career goals too could suggest different factors. Obviously things like work-life balance for family commitments or having children or something like that are impactful. But we also, saw comments and have heard before about issues with toxic culture, sexist law firm culture, and the unique challenges faced by women in the pursuit of partnership too. Many of the responses really reflected a strong desire for work-life balance and for more meaningful work. And we've discussed some of that already. But it is worth noting that the flip side to that was really positive interactions with senior staff and alignment with the firm culture actually encouraged some people to reconsider their goals towards staying at the firm, whether that's for long term or whether that's to pursue partnership. And it really demonstrates that culture is king in talent retention.
Well, it isn't a great shock that most of them, 52%, would trade a portion of their compensation for a cut in billable hours. Not a shock. More women than men made that selection. We can note that. 36% voted for more time off, and women selected this more than men as well. But there was some interest in student loan assistance and fully remote working. Jackie, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Laura. So as Laura just shared, the majority of the respondents to this question would trade a portion of their compensation for something that's related to work-life balance. So there's 4 things here. 52% wanted a cut in billable hours, 36% wanted more time off, 27% wanted a more flexible work schedule, and 22% wanted to be fully remote. So given that we see that most Gen Z talent is motivated by work-life balance considerations, I think we want to consider how we can balance these expectations of being productive and an effective associate who bills with their desire to have better work-life balance considerations. I would encourage a conversation around true hybrid work as a balanced approach, being a really good step in the right direction. So what I mean by this is, given the reversal that we're seeing with respect to remote work, hybrid work is going to be the appropriate compromise. But within hybrid work, I think we can offer this generation greater flexibility, and that can be a retention tool. Hybrid work is just a part of it, though. And many associates that we talk to, they have concerns over their billable hour expectations. So another suggestion that I would make is creating salary structures that allow for reduced compensation for reduced hours. I do really think that this will help with retention. Another gripe that we hear from this generation is that vacation is really challenging for them to take because it sets them back in terms of their billable hours. So maybe giving associates some kind of credit associated with the planned vacation might ease some of their concerns. But at minimum, I would encourage allowing associates to truly be able to disconnect on vacation. So some of the respondents to this question, they were focused on other core motivators of Gen Z, specifically financial motivations. So 22% of respondents, they wouldn't trade a portion of their compensation for other benefits. And I mentioned this earlier, this generation, they saw their parents lose jobs in 2008 and again during the pandemic. They're really highly motivated by economic stability. And so that's why that portion of Gen Z, they just want to maximize their compensation, and other benefits are not really a core motivator to them. And lastly, 23% of the respondents would trade a portion of their compensation for student loan assistance. So Gen Z, they're motivated by the pressure that they feel from their debt. As student loan is a big portion of the debt that this generation carries. So perhaps offering some kind of trade-off between compensation and student loan repayment options might also help retain this generation of talent.
All right, so here we see that 63% agree that partners at their firm care about associates. That's good. Just 21% strongly agree that their firm makes pro bono a priority, and we know that's important to them. 43% agree that their firm values social responsibility and justice. Just 13% agree with the statement that there is a sexist culture at their firm, which is very interesting. It's kind of a beacon of hope for all of us. Just 34% agree that their firm's associates are diverse with respect to ethnicity. 43% said their firm follows through on their stated diversity goals, and 38% believe their firm aligns with their personal values. 84% said there was a formal mentorship program. We asked how they were assigned their mentor, and 65% said it was a random assignment. 22% said they were picked by a partner. When asked if it had a positive impact on their development, the results were rather mixed. But if we look at these mentorships broken down, we can see that those that are randomly assigned have the worst cohort here. 43% agreed, 28% disagreed. Where a partner made the selection of who to mentor, 70% agreed that it was helpful and just 9% disagreed. Where an associate chose a partner, 63% agreed and 15% disagreed. For the diversity initiatives, just 43% agreed and 21% disagreed that there was a positive impact. I think this is tremendous data that all law firms should look at. Those randomly assigned, mentorships are not as successful as the ones that have a little more personal touch to them. When we asked Gen Z what changes they would like to see their firm make, and what would be the most meaningful changes to them, we got a lot of different responses. And again, it is no surprise that reducing the billable hour at 39%, was the largest response. And we saw the comment that lowering billable hours would be more humane, they're only human. This was a really big deal for them in a lot of ways. Jackie, do you have a comment?
So, we know that Gen Z is motivated by stronger boundaries between work and personal life. They want to work to provide for the personal life that they desire. They really don't want to live to work and just bill their hours. And so when we see that their work kind of bleeds into their personal lives and they start to bill excessive hours, we see significant burnout. And this can easily hurt retention, right? And motivate them to seek other opportunities and experience dissatisfaction. So listening to their concerns about this, I think, is important for retention. The Gen Z lawyers that I talk to, they want platforms that are not requiring 3 or 4 days in the office. They want individual groups that are allowing the associates within those groups to have some flexibility around face time expectations. And they continue to ask me about remote work. Although we know remote work is kind of few and far between right now, it's still something that this generation is seeking. So you can see from the data that 39% of Gen Z respondents want to see a reduction in their billable hours. So a solution to this might be offering graduated compensation plans that allow associates to bill less and then earn less overall compensation. I do think that would be a significant retention tool. They also want to have more of their nights and weekends available to them, and they're willing to make this trade-off for less compensation as well.
So 20% answered this question with Diversity, diversity, diversity. More diversity in leadership, more diverse partners, a requested emphasis on diversity by the firm. This is something very important to this generation. Nathan?
Thanks, Laura. So Gen Z is the most diverse generation to date, and obviously for Gen Z, diversity is a key consideration for them. It's at the heart of their values. As we've already heard, respondents highlighted the need for a better structured mentorship, and that was particularly for diverse and more junior associates. This includes things like structured mentorship, formal training, and opportunities for professional development that are inclusive and accessible for all. It's very hard to do in a hybrid world, but I think the key here is about structure. There's a clear call for firms to provide billable hour credit for time spent on D&I initiatives. And as Laura said, more diversity in leadership roles and genuine commitment to hiring and retaining diverse talent. We also noted that respondents called for better health and wellness benefits. And from a diversity lens, that was the bigger iceberg of diversity. So things like parental leave, childcare, well-being, psychological health, all of these initiatives were highlighted in the survey. And we've seen those struggles across the industry, even at the partner level. We think that implementing some of these changes and taking into account this for your diverse talent and diverse hiring strategy could really enhance job satisfaction, retention, and overall firm culture.
Now, 17% answered this big question with a request for more mentorship and training, and to match market pay and incentivize mid-level to senior associates to stay, so that juniors can actually form meaningful relationships with them. They want to be trained by them. They want to build mentorship relationships with them. They really sought structured training, cross-training, and even a better review process. Jackie?
So like Laura just mentioned, 17% of respondents answered that changes related to training would be very impactful for them. And earlier in the presentation, we learned that Gen Z, they didn't really feel like law school properly prepared them for law firm practice. So this further emphasizes why training is so important to them. There's a knowledge gap. Yeah. So the Gen Z lawyers that I speak to, they started practicing in an environment where there was a workflow contraction. And so this made it very difficult for them to get substantial hands-on experience and significant training on tangible client matters. And as they advance, they've had less opportunities to cut their teeth on junior tasks relative to their millennial counterparts. So in an environment where there's a workflow contraction, junior associates, they need guidance on how to get work and how to build their skills. And where certain practice groups are slow, allowing these junior associates to work for or support other practice groups that are somehow related might help us avoid the stagnation in their development. Also, this is where formal and informal training become even more important, because not only does it address Gen Z's desire for the training, but it can also ensure that they're not going to fall behind in their development. Additionally, practicing in a remote environment has made opportunities for informal training more challenging. But as we've said earlier, the pendulum has kind of swung in the other direction on that. And I do think that the hybrid work environment is going to be a huge benefit for this generation in terms of training. They're going to get more opportunities to ask for feedback in real time and develop those in-person relationships that will help them grow as associates. And lastly, similar to what Laura shared, Gen Z, they want their training to take the form of specific feedback. They want to encourage formal and informal mentorship programs. And they really want to push for their mentors to get some kind of credit associated with mentoring them, especially perhaps billable hour credit, because there's some guilt associated with asking for mentorship and knowing that time is taken away from billable time for that mentor.
17% answered that they were looking for some simple business changes, like flexible remote work, coverage for vacation, which we'd mentioned earlier, work-life balance, being honest about expectations, having some clarity on partnership and what the path to that looks like, more investment in staffing and more. So these were, sort of nuts and bolts requests of the law firm. Now, vacation has come up a few times, and the worry is those billable hours will be impacted by vacation. And we also see here that just finding coverage for vacation is also an issue. Nathan?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, we delve into the comments a little bit more, and exactly as Laura said, there was a lot of concern around staffing levels, calls for hiring more associates to spread the workload more evenly, and really just underscores the point made about work-life balance for this group of respondents. The strong desire to have policies that allow for fully unplugged vacation without the expectation of being accessible. A lot of the comments focused on technology, and that could help streamline work, enhance processes, as well as remote work capabilities and improving overall efficiency and ability to switch off. There are also things like perks that contribute to your daily life in the office and work satisfaction. That was things like office amenities for better parking. Somebody even commented that they'd like a latte machine, so you can take that how you want. But the feedback related to sort of the business overall really pointed toward desire for supportive, flexible workspaces and a lot more transparency for this generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, we had 7% who asked for more flexibility, remote work, and even mental health check-ins, which I think is important to note. Jackie, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So with respect to flexibility, the Gen Z lawyers, they want to be treated like adults. They recognize the importance of getting their workload accomplished. They know that it's important to be communicative, but they want to accomplish their workload on their own terms. They want a little bit more flexibility and autonomy. They want some flexibility around the hours that they choose to work and creating kind of a balance with their personal lives. With respect to remote work, they want more flexibility and options for remote work. And we know that these are things that were tested during the pandemic, and there was a lot of success around it. So we've seen a bit of a normalization around the viability of these options. And a lot of Gen Z lawyers are still seeing partners work from home, and they don't see that the work is suffering. So we know hybrid work is here to stay, but perhaps allowing Gen Z lawyers the option of earning remote work once they become fully trained and have proven themselves to the group may really help as a retention tool. And lastly, with respect to mental health resources, Gen Z wants a culture that fosters a supportive mental health environment. They want conversations around workload. They want to be able to have conversations around burnout and their mental state, and they want that to feel normal. And they also want to be able to take time off and take vacation time if they're experiencing burnout. And the idea to ponder is maybe creating firm days that are kind of mental health days or wellness days, where all associates and partners and other individuals within a firm are given credit, billable hour credit. I think would be a really nice step in terms of shaping culture around promoting an environment that supports mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Nathan. And thanks to everybody for joining us. I think we have a few minutes if we have some questions that have come in.
Yes, thank you, panel, for that really illuminating conversation. We've had a couple of questions come through the chat. What do the respondents consider an ideal true hybrid situation? Does that mean 3 days in the office, 2 at home, no requirement for number of days in office, and just general overall flexibility to structure their workday week in a way that works for them? So I don't know if the survey specifically addressed this, but I don't know if the panel has any takes that they would like to share.
I think that, oh, sorry, Jackie. Yeah, I mean,
Go
the
ahead,
associates I
please.
speak to, I think that I think in the ideal, I think for everybody likes this idea of full flexibility. You go in as and when you want to, make it work. But I think the data really shows us um, that mentorship and that structure is really important. And so I do think the probably realistic ideal is a set number of days in and maybe anchor days per team. But I think it requires a lot of organization and thought around this is the day we're going to do mentorship or certain training. And I really see the L&D space growing more and more in this because I think that that's the only way to achieve sort of strict training and everything like that that's required by clients in the long run to make that work. So I think there's an ideal and then a reality.
Jackie, did you have a comment?
Sure. I very much agree with what Nathan just shared. I think we have to balance the expectations of this generation, with the expectations of what is going to make a group function and making sure that junior associates are appropriately trained and integrated into a group. But I think that as individuals progress in seniority within these groups, perhaps we can give those individuals more flexibility. So I think that having a lot of structure that says it's mandated that you have to be in 3 or 4 days a week is a turnoff to this generation. It's only beneficial to them necessarily in their early years where they really need the training. But once they feel like they know how to do their job, they're frustrated by the FaceTime requirements. So I would encourage a conversation around adjusting expectations around hybrid work and the policies based on the seniority level of these individuals as they progress in Big Law.
Yeah, there was a comment too that talked about them being in the office, but guess who wasn't in the office? And that was the partner that they were supposed to be working with. So that too has been something that law firms have been struggling with. They can require the associates to be there and put in FaceTime, but they're having trouble getting their partners to come in at the same time. So little difficult. I think there's some other questions that came through the chat too.
There are. Is there a billable hour target that this group would consider acceptable?
That's a loaded question.
Yes.
I mean, I think that I don't have an exact number, but I think that to me it sort of points to this idea about the being prepared for the real world and the practical aspects of things, and do you really get what you're going into? And maybe that's an opportunity at the law school level to go in and have a bit more of a frank conversation around this is how law firm economics work. This is what billable hours are. And this is why you're expected to bill the hours that you do. London's a different market, obviously, to the US, and every firm have different hours targets and things like that. But because we have the American firms as a sort of separate category here compared to English firms as well, the hours disparity is quite large, but you have to have those conversations around money and salary and things like that and what that equals. And I think a lot of junior associates do not immediately understand that. And it takes some coaching really to help them kind of really work through what they really want and, what they're trading off for more salary versus fewer hours.
Yeah, and that sort of ties into another question that came in Q&A. It was like, is there any data on how well Gen Z understands law firm economics? So if that all works together, and then talking about they want more transparency, I think from the very beginning in law school, they need to be taught that this is a business. And this isn't a factory where you go in and you clock in at the beginning of the day and you clock out, because you're going to have clients that are going to reach out to you. There are going to be things that they reach out to you on the weekend for. This is not a normal job. So while we understand it's not great to work on the weekend, there will be times when they would need to work on the weekend. There would be times that they would need to understand that this is part of their role and their job. And I don't think that is clear at all to a lot of these Gen Z and to a lot of, other associates as well. So interesting. Yeah, it's a business, but again, it's about setting expectations and being transparent about what the job requires. I think that's really important. there
If
another
I could
question?
just
Craig?
add a little point.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, I agree with everything that Laura and Nathan shared, but I think that within Gen Z, different people are going to be motivated by different types of hour expectations, right? And having transparent conversations with the associates in your group about what their long-term trajectory looks like might help you with like work allocation around billable hours. Because if they're the associates who say that they want to make partner, they need to have clear understanding that they need to bill and be highly responsive, and that billing upwards of 2,000 or whatever the internal expectations are of the group are required. But the associates who are transparent with their partners that they want to use this as a stepping stone to going in-house, maybe those are the associates who are given different types of assignments and different types of expectations with respect to billable hours. My point is just that Gen Z, they're not all motivated by the same things. And some of them might be really motivated to bill high hours, the ones who want to make partner. And some of them are not. So maybe the ones who are not, we want to retain them. Maybe those are the ones where we have transparent conversations and we say, if you're willing to take this much of a reduction on your base comp and maybe not have a bonus, then you can have these type of hours expectations, and allowing more of a transparent conversation around that might be useful.
Great point. They're not a monolith. Right. They're going to be the people with all different kinds of stories and expectations within Gen Z.
Another question that came in through the Q&A. At the risk of sounding old, shouldn't it be practice what we preach? If partners want associates in, partners should be in. There is a dichotomy of do what I say, not what I do. Is it more, I did it, so you have to do it too? Legal is notoriously resistant to change, but must all the older people retire and die off for us, for there truly to be a paradigm shift? There will always be a generation divide, but doesn't this all just come down to working regardless of where we do it? Work is no longer a place, work is a mindset or idea. I think where the ultimate disconnect lies is people want the reward, just may not understand the work necessary to get the reward. Can we all agree on that?
Well, there was a lot there.
Yeah,
there's a lot there.
A lot to unpack there.
A lot to unpack. We have a great white paper on our website all about succession planning. Last year, there were more managing partners that retired than in many, many, many years previously. And a lot of that, I think, was a tipping point because we saw big exits from firms where their leadership was in age quite different, from the rest of the firm. So yes, some of that has to happen. There has to be some turnover, but there's another reason why there has to be turnover, and that's because you have to have space at the top for people to aspire to. If there's no room, to make partner in the firm or to make it up into that C-suite, then that's a reason to go look somewhere else and go to another firm. But there's lots more here to comment on, and I'm going to throw that to Nathan and Jackie.
What I would say is that the challenges around the expectation that the partner has to be in so that the associates are in, that all makes sense, right? But if the associates are telling us that they want more hybrid work, more remote options, and we're going to focus more on retention, and by the way, I think a lot of the partners like having flexibility too. The big thing to really think about, I think, is how do we make training and mentorship better in a more flexible environment, because coming back into the office to facilitate mentorship and training, it doesn't necessarily have to work that way if we can become more creative and find a way to facilitate training in a more of a remote or flexible environment. So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting comment. I've been thinking about it a lot as I've been listening, and I agree with everything everybody said, and I think there is always disconnect between generations, but I do get the sense that this Gen Z certainly look at the sort of I guess, path behind them or generational path behind them and think, well, is this worth it? And the point about not understanding the work necessary to get the reward, I think certainly with the pandemic and all of the things they've seen, they feel that's shifted. We've seen and heard that before. They feel like those goalposts have moved. And so I think it does create a really disconnected intergenerational environment in a working setting. Um, and maybe people don't understand the work necessary now, and maybe people themselves giving the work don't understand either. And I think the pandemic just compounded that, and this return to work, I think everyone feels it is a real shift and difference in the way that people are approaching client service, which is ultimately what pays the bills.
Yeah, yeah. And I do want to get to this question before we get to the end, and that is how do we have differentiate based on willingness to work high hours and to make work sacrifices without having a disparate impact on women? Yes, we should talk about that. I would love to talk about that because there's a huge impact on women. Right now, law firms are hiring more women out of law schools than men. There are more women associates than men. But when it comes to being a woman, they don't want them to be a woman. They want to treat them like a man. But they're still women. So there's going to be childbearing opportunities for them, and that's going to have a negative effect for them in the law firm. I spoke to a woman on an airplane 2 weeks ago, big partner, and she talked to me about a woman that worked for her that went out on maternity leave. While she was at the firm working, her work was excellent, and she was not being given as high a rating as someone who didn't go out on maternity leave. And her immediate response was, this is how the divide happens, right? This is how women get left behind. And the men in her group said, oh, here we go again. Here we go again. And just dismissing her concerns. This is a really valid issue. Women are women. They don't become a man just because you've hired them in a law firm. They're going to have children. They're going to need to step away from that. One of the best ways to deal with that is to encourage men at your firm to take paternity leave and not make it a stigma for them either. I also heard from a former partner in a top 200 law firm, when he said he wanted to take paternity leave, they all looked at each other and said, do we have that? Does that exist? You really can take that? We have a long way to go here, but this is going to be a building problem for law firms in general as women now outnumber men on the associate level. So this is going to be something that you're seriously going to have to deal with. Women populate the world. You can't have children in the next generation without women. And if you don't allow them to have children, we are missing something big here. So if you're hiring women, you need to treat them like women and not expect them to be men. That's how I feel about it.
And I absolutely agree. Laura, I think the one of the key things that I was thinking there is about the policy point, and I've spoken to male and female associates about parental leave, and we've looked into some of that, and there's such huge disparity around policy, whether people know about it, and even seeing examples of partners or other associates being able to take it. I will say, I see occasional posts on LinkedIn where people do get promoted even when they're on maternity leave, and I saw that the other day, and those stories are great to keep sharing, and it's a very small notch in actually the inverse of the sea of change that needs to happen. But I do think that that's a big part of the solution, is keep developing that policy and seeing people take it and encouraging it and having that culture where it's the norm and not seen as something shocking or surprising that's going to happen.
That's right. That's right. In the future, your best and brightest may be women. And if you are not working to keep those women, you are going to lose valuable people that could help your firm succeed. So this is something that's going to have to be dealt with.
Okay, we're coming up on time. I don't know if we have time for one more quick one.
Sure, we can get in one more.
We have all benefited from the water cooler interaction. We run the risk there is an entire generation that will never get that. They will be judged solely based on their work results. Do they want that?
Double-edged sword there.
Anyone care to tackle that one?
I think that there's ways to have water cooler interactions in a virtual setting or on the phone. I think it's really about taking the time to invest in your team and invest in your people. You don't need to be in front of one another to do that. What you need to do is to care. And I think when we focus on associates billing their work, billing their hours and doing their work, and not really investing in them as people because we have expectations that they're going to leave, it creates a culture that breeds an environment where there's not significant investment in the personal. So I don't think that the in-office atmosphere is required for that. I think what's important is to care about the people in your group and go the extra mile to develop those relationships, whether in person, virtually, or by phone.
Well, I'm old, so I really do see the benefit of being together. There's a lot of happenstance, the things that you don't say at 10 o'clock, I'm going to call you. It's more, I run into somebody in the hall, or I see this guy every time I go get coffee, I'm going to talk with him today. So there's some of that will be missed. And in order to create that personal connection that Jackie talked about, they're really going to have to put effort behind it. It's not going to be chance. It's going to be planned, and it's going to be an action that they really have to remember to take. So there will be a little bit of serendipity. There will be a little bit of that kind of magic lost, but there are workarounds, as she said.
Okay, well, it looks like we're right up on time. I want to thank you, panel, for this really engaging, I think, important discussion. Thank you to all the attendees for making this a really interactive session and for all the great questions. And I guess we'll sign off and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.